Greetings, book lovers everywhere. Also, conservationists and kindness advocates, like the person I'm speaking with today. I'm E-Train and welcome to E-Train Talks. I'm a 12-year-old literacy and kindness advocate, podcast host, and interviewer. And today, I am so thrilled to interview my next guest on my Care for Our Watersheds podcast series. Having earned 2 biology degrees, as well as having a master's in science writing, as you can tell, my guest knows her stuff. She's even written a book, which I have right here, titled Upstream, Downstream, Exploring Watershed Connections, which is focused on teaching middle schoolers and anyone who's interested the knowledge and perseverance of our watersheds, as well as what we can do to help, because our watersheds are in danger with climate change and all the growing shenanigans of the big wide world. And I'm so thrilled to welcome the one and only Rowena Rae. Thank you so much for being here. And can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much, E-Train. This is such an honor to get to speak with you. And thank you for that very kind introduction. So yes, I'm trained as a biologist, but right now I'm a science writer and an editor. And I write books, middle grade books, and I also work on things for adult audiences as well. So I do quite a range of things. But I probably got my interest in watersheds, which is what I wrote about for this book, from my biology, from when I was at university and I got to study lakes. And I got to move all over the world and travel and visit all kinds of different places and different lakes and work on them. So I got to work on one of the Great Lakes on Lake Erie. I got to go up into northern Quebec and work on some little lakes there. I worked in British Columbia, which is the province where I live now. And I even got to go and work on some lakes in New Zealand and in Antarctica.
Wow.
So, yeah, so all of those things, working in all those different places, gave me a real interest and love of freshwater and learning about watersheds.
Well, this question may sound silly, but I know that you are super smart, and I'm sure all of our listeners are curious and also might not even really know the answer. But what exactly is a watershed? What can you tell us, and why is it so important to protect them?
Okay, yeah, that is a really great question, because watershed isn't maybe a term that we hear frequently in our everyday conversations. But a watershed is, if you think about that word, so it's got the word water, which is that one we can figure out. And then it's got that word shed. Shed means, it's an Old English word meaning divide or separate. So if you think about up in the mountains, high in the mountains and the hills, where there is land, where there's almost like a ridge at the top of the mountains. And if water lands on one side of the ridge, it's going to flow one way. If it lands on the other side, it's going to flow the other way. So all the water that flows in one direction, all going down to one point, that is a watershed. So it's not just the water, it's all the land and all the water that all sort of goes down together. Another word that's often used for watershed is catchment basin. And that's kind of a nice one as well, because it gives you the idea of like a kitchen sink or a basin, and it catches all the water that falls on the edges or in it and goes down to a single point. So that's what a watershed is. So we all live in them. And no matter where we are, whether you're in the very middle of the continent, whether you're right on the ocean, I'm on an island, I'm still in a watershed, you're in a watershed where you are in California. So they're very, well, they're part of our lives. And what was the second part of your question?
Well, why should we care about protecting them in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, everything in a watershed, and in fact, everything in life is connected, right? Everything that we do makes a difference to something else. And that's the case in watersheds. So where we live, we're living in watersheds. All of our drinking water comes from either our watershed or a neighboring watershed. All the food we eat, all the habitat for animals and plants, everything is in these watersheds. So really, they're just components of our world, of our greater planet. And So we need to be really careful about how we treat them and what we do specifically to or with water and to land, because everything is connected, and what happens in one place will affect what happens somewhere else.
I'm sure we're all curious, how can kids and adults alike spread awareness for our watersheds as well as make a difference with our hands or however?
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, you mentioned one really great thing that we can do every single day when we are brushing our teeth, not keeping the water running. So using water really wisely and really regarding it as a very precious resource, which it is. It's nature's liquid gold. It is so precious. And we get maybe a little complacent. We take it for granted that we can turn our tap and just out comes the water without thinking about where it came from and what has had to happen for us to get that clean, drinkable water. So yes, using water very carefully and using it as a precious resource. Being very careful about what we put down the drain or put down the toilet. If your family has got some old paint or some medication that is expired, those things shouldn't be going down into the drains. They can go back to special facilities, the pharmacy or recycling depots, where they can be properly disposed of. Because once again, if we do put those down the drain, ultimately it's going to go out to a river, to a lake, and maybe the ocean, and there we've got fish and animals and our water, right? So those are some of the things we can do. Other things that we can also do are to be very careful about the land, what we do on the land that we live on, and being, of course, very respectful of the areas where we're in. A lot of communities, a lot of places have got watershed groups, or sometimes they're called stream keepers or lake keepers groups. And those can be really great opportunities for volunteering and for getting out and meeting some neighbors, and also learning a little bit about the land where we live and the water resources and helping out to keep them healthy.
What are some things kids like me can do? You talked about what kids and adults alike can do for small, and that's just so important. But what are some other things that kids can do, like using our voices to make a difference?
Mm-hmm. Well, definitely, first of all, reading and learning as much as you can is really great. So, you've started with my book, which is fantastic. There are lots of other resources out there, both books and websites and all kinds of interesting things where you can learn more. And then I think what's really important is to talk with your friends, talk with your family members, your teachers, and share some of what you've learned and some of the things that you find really interesting or neat and what you think is important. So those are things that I think you can definitely do. And then when it comes to, you mentioned the watershed address and getting to know a little bit more, becoming a bit more aware of your own surroundings and where you are, it's kind of a neat thing to try and figure out what your address is. In the book, I share that my address is where I live right now, I have quite a simple watershed address. I live in a very small watershed. All the water goes directly into one stream and straight out into the ocean. But depending on where you are on the continent or on any continent, you might have a watershed address that goes into one stream and that flows into another because it's a tributary and into a bigger and a bigger and bigger. So there's a couple things you can do. You can find, actually Google Maps works really well for this, but find a map and look at a big enough view that you can start to see some of the blue on the map, and find where there's a blue line, a river or a lake close to you, and then try zooming in a bit and seeing if you can follow it. There's also a resource that I'll tell you about, and I could maybe email this to you later, but it's really cool. It's called River Runner, and it's only it's this really cool program where you can, it's the map of the United States, not including Alaska and Hawaii, and you can click anywhere on it and it'll show you the path of a river, of a raindrop going through. It's totally cool. Unfortunately, it doesn't include at the moment Canada or Mexico or other parts of the continent, but for any of your listeners who are in the United States, it's a really, really cool. So I can send that to you, or would you like me to read out the URL of it? Would that be helpful?
You can send it to me and then I'll put it in the description of the video.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'll do that. It's a very, very cool. And you actually follow this droplet down the river. It's pretty neat. So things like that, just to get a greater appreciation and awareness of where you are and what's in your watershed is pretty cool.
Can you share what happens to wetlands and also our watersheds as a whole due to the effects of flooding?
With flooding. Yeah, you bet. So yeah, so a wetland is an area of land where that's soggy, basically, that's wet for most or maybe all of the year. So it's not just the soccer pitch during the winter when it's raining a lot. It's an area of land that's wet most of the year, and often they are alongside lakes or rivers, places where there's a lot of water anyway. So a wetland itself is not a watershed in and of itself, but they are incredibly important parts of watersheds. And it's because of the function they have. So wetlands, there's a lot of water there, but there are plants and there are animals, and they tend to be very amazing habitat for birds and for other organisms. And they're very, very good at absorbing water, at soaking up water. So when there are heavy rains, or if at certain times of the year when the water is flowing really fast down the river and it spills over its banks, wetlands can really help absorb that water, kind of like a sponge. And so that's sometimes the problem that happens when we build cities and we build with a lot of concrete environments, and we close rivers into channels. We put banks along the edge of them to try and keep them in place. And that's okay when the water isn't very high, but when there's an event with a lot of rainwater or a lot of water flowing downstream, they can overflow those banks. And if the wetlands have been built on and they don't exist anymore, then there's nothing to soak up that water and act as that sponge. So that's the really big function of wetlands. And there are others too. Wetlands are also really important in our drinking water, because they actually filter. If dirty water gets into a wetland, they will filter out some of that pollution so that they make the water cleaner. So sometimes that's kind of the same thing that happens in our bodies with our kidneys. Our kidneys clean our blood. They filter out the pollution. So sometimes you could even hear wetlands being called nature's kidneys for that reason.
Thank you so much for joining me, Rowena, and thank you all for listening. Now you have the tools. Go out there and be the change. And yeah, keep on reading. Keep on being an advocate for everything watersheds, or maybe out there you're a kindness advocate, an environmentalist, an author. You're all amazing. Thank you so much for listening. And be the voice of change, and just do as much as you can. Little goes a long way. Thank you so much. Bye.